And so I'm trying to help people decide for themselves what truth is healthy for themselves and then decide that at a level that will make real change.
What if there are things we never had the opportunity to learn? We've all been to school or training, but there are things they never taught us that actually make a powerful difference in life. I'm here to share with you all the pieces you've been missing: mindset, health, success, and more. And we'll all learn together from guests along the way. We may not have learned it the traditional way, but oh my goodness, let's keep learning how to do things differently. OMG, here we are again. And I bet you're going to be fascinated with today's episode. So, if you've listened to this podcast very much, you know we've talked all about all different aspects of brain science, the power of the mind, the power of thoughts, anything from resistance we might have in the back of our mind, money mindset, self talk, emotions, and all kinds of other things. So, today we're diving into a subject that is just as fascinating and maybe more so, and that is hypnosis. And I know personally how interesting and amazing hypnosis can be. And I also know that most of us don't really know what it is, how it can help, why we would go and meet with a hypnotherapist. So let's talk about it. My guest today, Andrew, has been a clinical hypnotherapist and life coach for over 10 years. He went to 3 different schools for hypnotherapy and is passionate about mental health and helping people create real and meaningful change. And he also runs Hypnotherapy Resource, which is a free nonprofit group to give the community free access to mental health tools and skills like hypnotherapy and other things you may have heard of, cognitive behavioral therapy, and neuro-linguistic programming, which he teaches and runs classes for. So, all of that is fascinating, and I'm so happy to have you join me today. So, welcome.
And thank you for having me.
Absolutely. So let's just start because I always find it interesting to see how did people get where they are now? What's the story? So how did you end up becoming a hypnotherapist?
Yeah, so I was working in IT at the time, and I always did a lot of kind of performance-based stuff as I was growing up. I was an opera singer at one point. I worked for the Washington Opera for a very short amount of time. I played piano. I was a dancer. I was a magician. I've done a whole bunch of stuff, and so I was trying to figure out what was the next thing I wanted to learn and explore and figure out. And so I found some hypnotherapy. I was looking for like entertainment hypnosis. I was really just looking for
Aha.
like a way to be fun at parties and impress girls and stick somene's hand to the wall, kind of stuff like that, right? And
Awesome.
and so but the only entertainment course I could find at the time was assuming that you already knew hypnosis. So then I found coursework, and that was in hypnotherapy, and that was Omni Hypnosis. Gerald Kine, an amazing, he's passed away, but he was an amazing community leader. And I was going through the hypnotherapy coursework. I remember watching him talk about a story where he was doing rapid inductions for a demonstration on stage. And he was going through, there were 20 people on stage, and he was going through them, and he's getting towards the last people, and he's bored because he's just doing the same kind of stuff, magnet induction and, arm bars and handshake inductions and all sorts of stuff. And he gets to the last guy, and I'm going to paraphrase this a little, but he gets to the last guy and he's like, "Hey, what's your name?" And the guy's like, "Dan." And he's like, "Hey, Dan, do you have any problems at all, like in your life?" And Dan goes, "Yeah, well, I've had like really crippling depression since I was 5 years old. Or not 5 years old, just for as long as I can remember. It's like, I've had crippling depression for as long as I can. Diagnosed, all sorts of stuff." And Jerry goes, do you want to fix that like right now on stage in front of everyone?" and
Oh my
and
gosh.
Dan's like, okay, let's do it, like whatever. And Jerry does. He takes him into this really nice trance. He uses the instant induction and deepens the trance and all that. And he just starts a regression. And it goes back to this time that Dan was 5 years old. He was swimming in the lake behind their home and he almost drowned. He, in fact, was saved by a fisherman. And when that happened, this kind of moment happened for this 5-year-old kid. He decided that like death is just right around the corner. Like you could die, I could die at any time. And there's this sort of meaninglessness that just followed him after that. And so he was just plagued by this just crippling depression. Like any relationship he started, it just. So Jerry does the modified chair therapy and has him resolve the kind of trauma, has him be the fisherman and say to this young boy what the 5-year-old kid needs to hear. And of course, as Dan is the fisherman, right, he's talking to himself. And of course, he's going to know exactly what he needs to know. And he finishes that up and brings Dan out of the trance. And he's like, "How are you feeling, Dan?" And Dan's like, "Oh my God, I feel just light and easy, and I don't know that I've ever felt good. Like I can't
Wow.
remember the last time." And I remember watching this and being like, wait a second, hold the phone. Are you telling me? Because I've gone through a lot of psych coursework, right?
Right, right.
I remember going, "Are you telling me that you can like fix depression, like serious, awful stuff in 20 minutes on a stage in front of an audience? Like that's even possible?" Because up until that point, I had just heard, "Oh, like you're just stuck with it for years and you probably are never going to get better. And the best you can do is kind of medicate it away." And I'm like, this is the holy grail of mental health if this is true. Like this is the most revolutionary mental health technology I've even heard about. Why have I never heard of this? And so that was kind of, and I'd had a friend die from
Mm,
depression, and my ex-girlfriend, she committed suicide. So these are things that
mm,
were very close to my heart. And I
yeah.
decided, look, I'm working in IT and all I'm doing is like this, helping some random person pick the right color of blue for their login page. Like this just isn't the same. I have to do this. If I know about this and don't do anything with it, it'll be, you know, I
I
don't
get
know that
that.
I can do that. I can't just ignore this new knowledge. And so that's kind of where it started. And I wound up working jobs and doing going through multiple kind of hypnotherapy clinics and schools, because when you're first starting out you never really feel like you're doing a good job.
Mm,
It's really intimidating because you can't see the matrix yet. You can't see when someone's in hypnosis or trance or that it's working. You don't know what you're looking at. And so it feels like you're just saying some stuff and maybe magic is happening. And
right.
so it's really intimidating. It's a hard field.
Yeah.
But I don't know that I can, do anything else. I mean, I can do other things. I just don't know that I can not do that.
Yes. The reason I ask this question to everyone is that I feel like people who do things related to super broad category mental health, all those things I was naming in the
Yeah.
introduction, usually have some type of personal story that basically means
Yeah.
exactly what you said. They can't not do it. They learned something and they have to share.
Yeah.
That's always to me the most powerful thing.
Yeah.
And why I do this podcast, because I started learning all these things and I thought I can't not share them. Here we are. So I totally
I'll
get.
bet you learn so many cool things doing this.
Yeah, oh, absolutely. Absolutely. And I also want to add in, because I'm sure everyone's curious now from a few things you said, like we got to understand more what you're talking about. But before I say that, I have been a couple
Sure.
times to comedian entertainment shows where they do hypnosis on stage. And so if listeners, if you haven't
Yeah.
been there They are hilarious. They are, I think, harmless. I don't know if you agree. They make people do silly stuff and it's all funny. But that's not what we're talking about today. We're going to kind of go deeper into that. So I just wanted to
Right.
throw that out there. Okay, so all that being said, I know this is hard, what I'm getting ready to ask you, to put into a reasonable sized answer, but I'm going to ask it anyway. Tell us, what is hypnosis, and how does it work in at least, a way that we can kind of start to grasp onto?
Yeah, so there are multiple models of the mind. These are not always conflicting. So I'm going to give you one framework, which is the one that I generally work from. But like if I ask a neurochemist how the mind works, they're going to talk about serotonin uptake and neural pathways and inhibitors. If I talk to a surgeon about the mind, they might talk about what happens when you cut into different parts of the brain and the cerebral cortex, like different pieces of the
Hmm.
anatomy. And if you talk to different people, they'll give you, these are not conflicting. They are both true, right? But they look at the mind in different ways and perspectives. So, first, let me just say that this is not in contradiction to other models. And hypnosis, like, so Freud was a hypnotist, right? And he was kind of the first person that put the term subconscious into the common nomenclature.
Hmm.
And what he would have found is that when you ask someone a question in normal conversation, they might, about like why they did something, they might give you one answer. But if you take them into like a deep trance or hypnosis and ask them the same question, they might give you an entirely different answer.
Mm.
And so and usually a more intuitive and more meaningful one at that. So what Freud would have discovered is that he's like, well, there's what people say on the surface, but there must be some kind of subconscious mind, like a part of your mind that you're not always consciously aware of, for these different answers to come out. And so this is kind of the basic model. And there's a few different within hypnotherapy communities, but we can essentially split the brain into the conscious and the subconscious. And your subconscious's job is to keep you alive in the life or death sense of the word. It's
Hmm.
very survival oriented and it does a lot of different things. It regulates breathing and heart rate and different endorphins. It handles core beliefs and emotions and all sorts of stuff. I mean, it's like 98% of the background processes that happen. Your conscious mind is the part that handles kind of logistics. It's very deductive reasoning and it's the part of you that puts a plan into action. And the reason your conscious kind of functions the way it does is because when you have something that you know is true, you have to be able to explain it in a way others will accept. This is kind of the big separation between kids and adults, right? Which is that
Mm.
adults have the language and tools to explain things to others in a way that they will appreciate, and children really don't. And so, about 11 to 13 years of age, your subconscious kind of reaches maturity, and your conscious mind starts showing your math, as it were. Like you and I both know there's things you can and can't tell your parents, your teachers, your friends, your families, your partner, your
Right.
kids, whatever. And so this part of us, the conscious executive part of us, is in charge of how do I explain this in a palatable way. Like when you get that vibe check about that person and you're like, I don't know if my friend Becky should be dating that guy right now. That part. And now you have to explain to Becky why this is not a good idea. So
Which is not necessarily an easy thing to do. Yeah.
exactly. And so what happens is there becomes this kind of schism, right? Between what you can explain and what you feel is true. And so when we have something that we feel is true deep down at a subconscious level, but it doesn't check out at a deductive or logical level, there is a conflict there. And this is where we see a lot of disorders show up and a lot of sort of self assessed problems.
Mm.
So your subconscious is built for survival and it's really not working on the same rules. The rules it uses make a lot of sense, but they are different rules. So It's associative rather than deductive. So if two things are in the same time and the same place, it's like maybe they're linked because there's lots of stuff that I don't understand but is still true. And I don't have to know the reasons why something is true. I just need to be able to prepare for it. When you are a kid, the logic that you use is limited by the information you've learned. And your perspective might be very limited. The decisions you might make at a subconscious level, because again, your conscious hasn't really formed
Right.
very strongly yet. The decisions you've made at that level, they're going to be based on limited information. And most of those decisions are true. Like, there's a ground beneath us, and there's a sky above us, and I have two parents, or, not everyone does, but right, like, I'm this set of characteristics. And then as we get older, some of those rules don't make sense anymore. If we don't update those rules, then we have these sort of problems, the same kind of schism that I'm talking about. So if you take a kid and their parents leave him, he might think, "Oh, I'm a bad kid. I'm someone who hurts people or makes them run away from me, and I'm going to be alone forever."
Mm.
And then later on, that kid learns, "Hey, no, your parents didn't leave you. You were taken away from them because they were a mess, right?" And so, or
Right.
they died in a car accident or
Right.
whatever. That perspective shift has to happen when we make these old decisions and we never update them. And they kind of just get stuck in our subconscious. And these can happen as adults too. But because your subconscious doesn't care about if it's logical, it'll often hold on to these decisions for really long periods of time. Does everything I'm saying make sense so far?
Yes, actually, I have studied the conscious and subconscious brain quite a bit. So it absolutely makes sense to me. And at the same time, I'm thinking, would it make sense to someone who's hearing you say this the first time? But I think you've explained it really well. What I'm thinking of in particular is the story you told where, something happened at age 5 and somebody drew a conclusion in their subconscious mind that it was about them being a bad person,
Right.
or not bad person. It was about them. They were about to die, which obviously all of us adults listening are thinking, well, that has nothing to do with it. But they form this and it stays, right?
Right.
That's what you're saying.
Right.
Okay.
Yeah,
Got
absolutely.
it.
So, a really good example of kind of how your mind changes. So, generally, people make internal change in one of two ways. And we can kind of see this in like a fight. So, there usually, and I ask this to a lot of people, but like, I can't think of the last time I changed my mind in the middle of a big fight. It's
Mm.
very hard to change your mind in the middle of a big fight. Usually people change their mind after the fight though. They might reevaluate something someone said and then think about it a little bit and go, "Okay, yeah, damn it, that's fair. Carol does
Yes.
kind of have a point here, or Jeff does kind of, yeah, all right, that's fair." What's happening here is your brain, your subconscious goes, "Hey, this is not the time to make change. This person I'm fighting with does not have my best interests at heart right now. They are fighting with me. So I'm just going to dig in my heels. And then when it is safe to do so, I can then reevaluate what's going on. But not right now, not during this moment of duress." Hypnosis is essentially the state that your brain goes into or that your mind goes into, where your subconscious goes, "Hey, maybe I can reevaluate some stuff." And there's about 10 ways that people go into trance or hypnosis, but they fall under two broad categories. The first category is that you are in safety and you can maybe rethink some old thoughts or beliefs,
Hmm.
and there's no pressure and it's okay to do so. And the second basic category is you're in danger or it's an emergency and your subconscious goes, I can't, I don't know if this is the right decision in the long run, but we can't have this happening again. So we're going to make this kind of radical change and we'll deal with the consequences later. And so, for instance, we see that a lot with like food allergies, for instance, or there's a lot of people out there who they have a food, and every time they think of that food, they feel kind of sick or nauseous.
Mm,
And what almost always happened is somewhere along the lines, they got sick after eating that food.
mm-hmm.
And so ever since they ate that food, their subconscious goes, I don't know if apples caused me to get, I don't know, the flu that one time or mono, right? I don't know if apples cause mono, but I know that they kind of happened around the same time as that mono. And that was really dangerous for us. And if apples could, maybe it's not that one apple that I had. Maybe it's all apples. Maybe all apples are just poison. I just didn't notice before. And so your subconscious plays it safe. It's, again, concerned with your life and death survival. And sometimes that just includes keeping your parents happy. I mean, I
Hmm.
know that we live in a world that's much nicer than it used to be, but we used to send kids up the chimneys, in Victorian era England, and we used to send them into coal mines. Life's been hard on
True.
kids.
True.
Another good example, most people know that babies have a soft spot on their head. Most people know you shouldn't shake your baby. The reason we know that so commonly is because it was a problem. We had to educate the public and go, hey, don't shake your baby, no matter how mad you are at them. And so it is a very strong survival incentive to be socially accepted when you're young and older. So when we talk about survival in the life or death sense, I don't want to water that down. It is very real.
Right.
So your subconscious gets veto rights on all these sort of nice, you're like, oh yeah, I would like to do this with my life. And your subconscious is like, yeah, but we're never touching apples again, right? And you're like, well, I'd like to be able to eat apples. And your subconscious goes, yeah, I don't think that's going to happen. And so, but it does, there's no problem with the apples, but only because you can't explain why to someone else. Not because, theoretically, maybe apples are somehow bad for you and you just don't know. Your subconscious is like, I just don't want to risk it. I'm going to play
Mm,
it safe.
right.
So, hypnosis is the state that you go into where your mind is designed to create change rapidly, to either reevaluate it from a place of safety or from a place of emergency. And what a hypnotist does is they try to replicate that state that happens to you naturally all the time. And then once they replicate that, maybe do something with it. On a stage, it's for entertainment. If you're a hypnotherapist, it's for therapy.
Yes. Gut health is such a huge part of living healthy. When I learned that the health of our gut affects our hormone levels, how our digestion works, what we absorb into our body in terms of nutrients, and even how our brains work, I was surprised. Every morning, I started using a Green Gut Glow drink to make sure that I was taking care of my brain, skin, nail, hair, gut, and making sure I get enough veggies because I don't know if I would eat enough otherwise. I have felt a difference minimizing puffiness and bloating for sure. Go have a look at omgteachme.com/recommendations and look for the Green Gut Glow Plus. So, what you're describing sounds to me like what a lot of people might deal with when it comes to phobias, too, right? I know that's something that hypnosis can potentially
Yeah.
help with a lot. There's something in the subconscious that connected something that,
Yeah, you almost drowned and now you're afraid of water. Someone attacks you in a back alley and now you can't walk down an alley ever again. And it doesn't matter that the alley is behind your house in Nebraska now and you're not in inner city, I don't know, Chicago in the 80s. Uh, your brain just goes, maybe it's all alleys. Maybe all alleys forever are danger.
right, or maybe
It
all
doesn't care.
darkness, or who knows what. Yeah.
And what's really interesting is, like with the food poisoning example or the food example, if that happens, your subconscious might cue into other cues as well. If there's someone playing a musical instrument in the background, your subconscious might go, maybe that instrument is bad. And so the next time you're at a football game and the band is playing, you might start feeling sick or uncomfortable. And consciously, that won't make sense. So you're going to explain it away in some way. You're going to be like, oh, maybe it's just this thing I ate earlier. I probably shouldn't have had those hot dogs. Or maybe I'm just nervous about the upcoming test or job thing, right? You're going to make good reasons why that makes sense. But the real reason is because someone happened to be playing the tuba one time when you got sick.
Wow.
And so it's pretty wild.
So you had explained this to me in the past, and now that I'm hearing this again, and listeners, you're maybe hearing this for the first time, I want to tell you what my reaction was and still is, and that is, we must really be messed up. If all these crazy things are saved in our subconscious brains and we don't even realize, oh my goodness, what a mess it must be in there. I don't think that's probably what I should be gleaning from what you're saying, but there's some of that, I guess.
Well, if you think about hypnosis as a natural state, like when you're driving your car and you get to your exit and you don't remember getting there, you will start to realize that there's going to be a lot of random decisions that might not make a lot of sense. And most of the time, they roughly work out to a functioning, surviving human being. I mean, close is close enough when it comes to most people's mental health, right? You can survive and function even with a phobia. You don't get to eat apples or go in the water anymore. But it's fairly minor stuff, and we get more serious disorders as well that happen.
Right.
But for the most part, people do okay. And I think that it's honestly kind of miraculous that we are as functional as we are, because most of the stuff that you've decided is just objectively healthy for you. You know, I mean, I think most folks are doing pretty good. But when we acknowledge that we're holding on to things that we might not be thinking like make sense consciously, it begs the question, what can I do? And maybe I've been approaching this from the wrong end.
Okay, that makes sense. And to echo what you're saying, I know that you said the function of our subconscious brain is basically to keep us alive and to keep us
Yeah.
safe. So it's not making crazy decisions, it's making careful, keep us alive
Yeah.
decisions. Yeah.
And like we can see a good example of that with kids who are generally very responsive. So you get, it's the old classic example. You get a kid and they fall and they scrape their knee and they're crying and they're upset. And then you go to that kid and you go, "Hey, do you want to get some ice cream?" And the kid's like, "Heck yeah, I want ice cream." And they totally forget that they're injured. And
Right.
to the point where they don't feel any discomfort at all. Because what you really communicated to that kid is they're safe. And the point of pain is to let you know that you need to treat an injury,
Hmm.
maybe stay off it. So they're very malleable in that way. And adults have a much harder time. We have to go through a more formal process with adults than just like, hey, this is now true or this is now not true.
Right.
But because we pass on our knowledge, they generally get a pretty good sense of things. Usually they're learning smart life lessons. But, it's like there's ones that don't fit at all. Like, I remember my mom telling me I had to apply to jobs in person or no one would take me seriously. And every time I did, the person would be like, "Hey, you're supposed to apply online." I'm like, "Okay."
Yeah, so that's just kind of a generational change for sure. My
Yeah,
kids,
it's
same
no one's
thing. Yeah.
fault. It's just the
Yeah.
rules that my parents grew up with and the rules that I live with and the rules my children will live with are very different. Our world changes very fast now.
Yes, I agree with that. Okay, so I think you've given a great explanation of what this is and what you're trying to achieve. And so let me see. What you're trying to do with hypnosis is basically getting communication with what's going on in the subconscious and figure out, is there something there that
Yeah.
maybe could be solved or assuaged? Is that a fair way to say it?
And then give it perspective. And so, at the core of all mental health problems that are not biological in nature, like lead poisoning, for instance. And some biological problems get included in this. I mean, your brain and body are very powerful.
Right.
But at the core of almost all mental health problems is this belief or decision that somewhere along the lines you made that X is true. And whatever X is, you can make a different decision, and that decision will change like, so a good example of most things are two things. Most things are true and false. So like, if I want to say I'm financially successful, well, compared to Elon Musk, I'm not. I'm totally poor, right? But compared to the poorest guy on the planet, I'm extraordinarily rich.
Right.
And there's only one guy who's objectively like financially successful, and there's only one guy who's objectively financially a failure, right? And that guy
Yes.
on the bottom, they're in debt to the mob, they've got all sorts of,
Right.
so most people are somewhere in the middle. If you're not the 2 out of the 7 or 8 billion people on the planet, you're somewhere in the middle. And so you can justify with facts and evidence either one. And so now the question is, well, which one is healthier for you? And
Hmm.
so I'm trying to help people decide for themselves what truth is healthy for themselves, and then decide that at a level that will make real change. I'm not making someone decide that. They're the one doing the work. And my job is to be a guide, to walk them through the steps necessary to get healthy.
I like that explanation. I think that's going to make sense for people listening for sure. I was going to ask, what are some typical things that hypnosis can help with? But I think you've kind of answered that. Lots of mental health related issues, also things that maybe impact our day to day life, like a phobia, for example. Is there some other big category of things that you commonly see that people ask for
Yeah,
help with?
medical stuff all the time.
Mm,
I mean, think about the placebo effect. Most people know what that is, right?
yes.
Any doctor knows what a placebo is. And the studies that have been out for decades that you can create physiological change in the body by using a placebo, a significant change. How far does that rabbit hole go? Well, the truth is, we don't really know. But what I know from personal experience, and also just the data and the evidence is out, is that your brain and your body communicate a lot. And
Hmm.
so we see allergies, heart conditions. I worked with one person who had endometrial hyperplasia, and they came in with serious problems. Pain work is really common. I know that's more perceptual, but I think a lot of people categorize it as medical.
Yes.
Surgery prep and recovery.
Wow.
There's just a lot of things that your subconscious kind of puts its influence into. And
Yeah,
so I think the mind doesn't get enough credit for some of those things. We can acknowledge that stress will totally tank most of your recovery processes in the body, but we often don't acknowledge that, like, there's a real mental component there.
that's a great, great, great point. I agree. I agree. And the other thing that came to mind when you were saying that is addictions. I know that's something people,
Yeah, addictions, phobias, anxiety, sadness or depression or exhaustion, grief and loss, speech disorders like
wow,
stuttering. I mean, it's really hard for me to say the list because the list
right,
gets really, really big. What is
right,
your brain and your mind influence?
right.
Mo-
Everything.
yeah, if you get shot in the head, there's not much that's working afterwards. So there are probably limits, and we don't know exactly what those limits are. Can it change genetic code? We don't know. Epigenetics suggests maybe we can. Can I change a hair color? I don't know. I haven't personally had success with that, but I haven't tried hard enough to like really be sure. Where does that line end? You can
Wow.
probably guess that it won't fix something where there's like a double break in your genetic code, right? You don't have the gene or instructions anywhere to figure out how to do a process.
Right.
So when we get people where both parents pass on a gene, you have to have instructions in your body somewhere. Likewise, there are things that hypnotherapy can't possibly touch, like lead poisoning. Your brain, your body doesn't even have a process for clearing out heavy metals that have gone past the blood brain barrier. So don't go see your hypnotherapist if you ingested mercury. And generally speaking, you want to make sure you're going through all the right steps. See your doctor. Take your medications. See a psychologist or a therapist if you can. But anything short of, I would say, like hard biological things that your body literally has no framework for dealing with, or I don't know where the limits are, but
Right.
they're pretty liberal, I think,
It's pretty
at
amazing.
most mental health issues.
Yeah, that's pretty amazing. And thank you for saying, yes, listeners, see your doctor, see your medical professional, whatever it is. We're not saying not to. That's
Yeah,
an important caveat to
be
add.
safe, be healthy, take your meds. Don't
Yes.
take more than you need to, but do
Yes,
what you got to
yes.
do.
Follow all those instructions. Yes. So I have an eye to the time, but there's a few things I really still want to ask you too. So if someone is listening to this and they're thinking, okay, maybe I could try it for, XYZ thing that's been bothering me. Can you tell us in sort of a brief way, what would people expect to experience when they go to a hypnotherapy appointment? Should they be nervous? So, what should they expect?
Well, that's a complicated question. Hypnotherapy is not really one tool, it's actually a whole series of tools. I mean, there's the hypnosis side of that, and there's different tools for that, but there's also the therapy side of that, and not everyone responds in the same way to the same therapies. And so, as a hypnotist or a hypnotherapist specifically, I kind of have to wear a lot of different hats. I have to know a lot of different stuff. And sometimes the stuff I need to be able to do is help people with like real life problems.
Mm,
Like sometimes life's just hard and they're trying to figure out something that their inner subconscious might not have the perspective for yet. However, with that said, there's a few different general approaches that we see from hypnotherapists. One is the sort of suggestion based work. That's the stuff you see on YouTube where someone kind of talks at you. There's hypnoanalytics where like parts therapy or regressions where you're more interactive. I tend to do more of that because I think it tends to be a little more hard hitting, but it's more intimidating. So there's a lot of people who kind of shy
mhm.
away from it. There's kind of the NLP imagination branch of things where you're doing imagination exercises. I do those things too, but not everyone does. It's really, again, it's hard to pinpoint exactly what to expect. But what you should do is go in comfortable. Go in just trying to see what the process is, and don't put too much stress on whether you're in deep enough, or if you had X or Y criteria met. Your subjective experience will be different from person to person. And if you start getting in your head about what that's
Mm,
supposed to be like, you're robbing yourself the chance to actually see what it's like. And more importantly, you are trapping yourself in hypnosis is the essence of being very present in the moment and not worried about what's coming up and not focused on what's happened in the past, but just being right here and right now in the present moment. And so my job as a hypnotherapist is to help guide. And my job is to think about all the steps. I don't want you thinking about those steps because then you're in your analytical brain, the
yes.
logical deductive part, and you're not in that intuitive subconscious part. And so when you're worried about the what your experience is supposed to be like, you're analyzing too much. You're not being present. So the job of a person who comes to see the hypnotherapist is to let go and let the hypnotherapist guide them to creating results for themselves. And everything that gets in the way of that, if we can avoid it, we should avoid it. Come in wearing your comfy socks or slippers, have had food and water, Don't come in on anything that's unhealthy for you. Try to make sure your money type stuff is squared away beforehand. You don't want to be bringing a bunch of stress and expectations into your sessions.
That's a great point. That's a great point. And it's not something where something scary is going to happen and you won't remember anything or any of that. So, good that we dispel all of that too, I
Yeah,
think.
there is a kind of forgetfulness that happens with hypnosis sessions sometimes, but it's the kind of forgetfulness where, like, you're driving down the road and you zone out, and then you're like, I don't remember what happened. If you have someone next to you in the car and they're like, yeah, but don't you remember when that blue Mercedes cut you off? You're like, oh, yeah, I guess I do remember that. It's not the same thing as like amnesia.
Right. Absolutely. Okay. So, are there any risks about hypnosis as an option? Any drawbacks that people should be aware of?
Hypnosis is pretty safe for the most part. There's a agency that people have in hypnosis. It's really hard to get around that. So it's pretty safe. The things that you should watch out for are usually the things we see from like half trained hypnotists or people who are like, I was a psychologist and I took a weekend course in hypnosis, and they don't really know what to be careful of. A good example is like aversion therapy is this thing we used to do. I never did, but others have, where they associate something with a really negative feeling.
Hmm.
So like if one woman sued a hypnotist because he made this woman, I say made, it was her, she consented to it, she wanted to do it, but she saw, but he had her see like bugs in flour because she wanted to stop having flour. And so she would just imagine bugs anytime she saw flour. Well, after that worked, she couldn't go into the supermarket because like everything has flour in it. She couldn't walk down a single aisle.
Ugh.
Like, this is really obvious stuff to anybody who's properly trained, but sometimes you'll get someone who just hasn't thought it through. But it's like martial arts. It's not the novice to worry about. They're just going to avoid the fight. And it's not the master. The master knows how to win or avoid the fight. It's the guy who thinks they know how to fight, but they don't really.
Hmm.
So be aware of, and you shouldn't do this much. Again, it's pretty safe. Anything you can do in hypnosis, you can pretty much undo in hypnosis. So like if someone really did mess up real bad, you could just find someone else. The number of
That's a great
lawsuits
point.
is
Yeah.
extremely small. I mean, there's no surgery that's safer. You know what I mean?
Right. Good point.
No medication that's safer.
So I guess making sure you find someone you're comfortable with, feel good about, and they have experience, and you know what that experience is, and you know how they've been trained. All of that is just generally smart when we're
Yeah.
dealing with any sort of mental health practitioner. So
Yeah.
sounds like that would work.
And I would say the best tool in this case is just understanding more about it. I mean, if you understand what hypnosis is and isn't, what hypnotherapy is and isn't, you're going to have a really easy time spotting the few guys out there who are doing really wonky stuff.
Right.
You should learn it anyway. I mean, you don't need to be like out there practicing as a like formal business, but like having a few tools to work with your brother or sister or friends or families or yourself is always going to be valuable.
Interesting. Wow, that's interesting. Yeah.
Yeah, if it were up to me, and this is the point of hypnotherapy resource, is I want everyone to have mental health tools. It bothers me that it's locked behind a paywall right now. And I want it taught in classrooms to like, middle schooler, elementary schoolers. I want 10-year-old kids in the hallways helping each other with anxiety and depression and all sorts of different things that they're struggling with that they maybe wouldn't tell their parents. I want people learning these tools intuitively and practicing with each other. That is like my nirvana.
That's amazing. I used to be a classroom teacher, and just knowing what all these students go through, you're absolutely
Yeah.
right. That's amazing. Okay, so that leads me then to ask you, how can people get in touch with you? I know you have a practice in Northern Virginia.
Yeah.
How might people find you if they wanted to work with you or wanted to know more about hypnotherapy resource?
Sure. So, and let me just say, I want people to not feel beholden to like an ad. But if someone did want to get in touch with me, if you have questions or concerns or just anything that I couldn't answer today because it's been very brief, there's a couple ways you can do that. I run Northern Virginia Hypnotherapy. You can send us an email or a phone call. Our website, Nova Hypnotherapy, Nova for Northern
Yep.
Virginia, novahypnotherapy.com. You can go and through my clinic and kind of reach out that way. Send us an email that way. Alternatively, my hypnotherapy resource group runs a weekly meetup group called, I think it's Fairfax Hypnosis and hypnotherapy workshop. So you can check that out, and it's just free information. And I'll answer any questions you have. I'll try to do my best, no matter what it is.
Excellent. That's excellent. I know we're going to have curious people. So
Yeah.
I have to ask you the last question, which is a thing that we do always on this podcast because we are always adding to a playlist of good mood kind of songs that is on Spotify. So, what is your favorite song to listen to when you want to put yourself in a good mood, raise your vibration, just kind of feel good?
I would say the music that I'm really appreciating the most right now it's by Radical Face called The Missing Road. And I love
Okay.
it. It's got this really kind of slow build up, and I just play it in the car when I'm driving. Oh, no. It might be The Road to Nowhere. Either one. Radical Face is
Okay.
amazing. And
Okay.
it's
Great.
instrumental, and it's got this sort of undertone that just carries you through, and it's beautiful, and I love it.
That's fantastic. I love it when it's a completely different suggestion than what other people have said. And usually it is. Honestly, we've had very few repeats. So
I think music's really beautiful, and it's very diverse, and that's kind of the coolest part about art.
agreed. Absolutely. Okay, well, thank you so much. Like I said, I know that people are going to be really fascinated with this subject, and you explained it in a way that is not how I've heard it before and really went deeper into how the brain works. And that is fantastic. That's what we're here for.
I'm
So I
so
really
glad.
appreciate it. Yeah. Thank you for joining us.
Awesome.
I hope you enjoyed today's episode. OMG, I would be so honored if you would take a moment, leave a rating, leave a review, or take a screenshot and share on your social media. Let's get this message out further into the world. Now it's time to head down to the show notes to see the resources I mentioned. We may not have learned this before, but it sure is powerful now.